They only wanted a father for a single day. He only wanted to be left alone. But some promises are heavier than bullets, and some wounds deeper than scars. The first bullet missed his boot by an inch. He didn't flinch. The second lodged in the wooden beam beside his head. He sighed, flicked the stub of his cigarette into the dirt, and turned around slow, like a man hoping to find anything but what was there. But there she stood. Two of them, in fact. Girls, maybe 10 or 11, each holding a slingshot fashioned from tree branches and stubbornness. One had freckles across her nose and a cut above her brow. The other stood a half step behind her, hands still trembling from the shot. Their boots were too big, their coats mismatched, but their eyes were fixed on him like he was the answer to a question they were still figuring out how to ask. "Are you the gunslinger?" the freckled one asked. He squinted at them, scratched his jaw, and said nothing. "The one they talk about," she pressed. "The one with the long shadow and the black coat." Still nothing. The second girl stepped forward, her voice cracked. "We want you to be our father." Just for a second the whole town went quiet. No wind, no boots, no coughing from the saloon porch behind him. Just those words floating there like smoke. He laughed, or tried to. It came out broken. "I think you got the wrong man." The freckled one crossed her arms. "No, we don't. Your name's Silas Jude. You rode with the Hollow Six. You put Sheriff Graves in the ground outside Darby Creek." "Rumors," he muttered. "And you saved a girl from drowning in Stillwater Bend," the second one added. "That was real." His jaw clenched. "What's this about?" The first girl stepped closer now, bold despite the tremble in her chin. "Our mama's dead. Been dead 2 weeks. Nobody's come for us. And the pastor says he'll send us east if we don't find someone to take us by Friday." "It's Wednesday," her sister whispered. Silas looked between them. He'd seen women cry for husbands, men weep for sons, but this was different. These girls weren't begging. They weren't pleading. They were asking, like it was something simple, something you could say yes or no to without bleeding. He turned his back. "Please," the second girl whispered, "just for one day." He walked away. They didn't follow. That night he sat in the corner of the saloon nursing a drink he didn't want, replaying the scene over and over in his mind. Their words didn't haunt him, it was their eyes, big and stubborn and worn down like they'd seen more years than they'd lived. The town buzzed around him. Cards shuffled. Glasses clinked. Laughter rose from a corner table where a ranch hand tried to sweet-talk the barkeep's daughter. But Silas felt like he was still standing in the dust, staring down 2 little ghosts who hadn't even flinched when they named him father. He downed the last of his whiskey and shoved his chair back, boots thudding hard against the floorboards. The saloon quieted. Folks had learned not to ask where he went or why. He stepped out into the night, stars sharp above, and made for the edge of town. He didn't know where the girls were sleeping. He didn't want to know, but his boots carried him to the churchyard anyway. The door to the chapel was open, just a crack, candlelight flickering inside. He pushed it open slow. The air smelled of pine wood and ash. The pews were empty, save for the front row. There, curled beneath a moth-eaten quilt, were the 2 girls. Their faces were turned toward each other, arms wrapped tight like they were each other's last lifeline. He didn't move. Didn't speak. Just watched. And then he turned to leave, but froze when he heard it. "You came." It was the freckled one. She didn't open her eyes. She just said it, soft and certain, like she knew he'd be there eventually. Silas exhaled through his nose, rubbing a hand across his face. "Go back to sleep." "Will you stay?" her sister asked. He hesitated, then sat in the back pew, hat in his hands, and whispered, "Just for a little while." The next morning he woke with a crick in his neck and a weight in his chest. The girls were gone, so was the quilt. He stepped outside just in time to see them by the well, hauling water with practiced hands. They didn't look surprised to see him, didn't look happy either, just ready, like they'd expected it all along. "Breakfast," the freckled one said. If you're gonna be our father for the day, you gotta eat with us." He frowned. "I didn't agree to that." "You didn't say no," she shot back. So he followed them, not because he wanted to, but because he couldn't make himself turn away again. They sat in the back of the chapel, bowls of thin porridge and hard bread passed between them. The girls talked about their mama, about how she used to sing even when the world was falling apart, about how she said the sky always cleared after the worst storms. She used to say thunder was just heaven clearing its throat, the younger one said, so we wouldn't be scared. Silas listened, didn't speak. Every word scraped something raw inside him. He didn't ask their names, he should have, but some things felt too fragile to touch. After breakfast, the freckled one stood. "We got a list," she announced. "A what?" "A list, things fathers do." He blinked. "Things like what?" She pulled a crumpled paper from her pocket. "Fix something, tell a story, walk with us to the hill where the trees part, sit on the porch, laugh, teach us something, not fight, not leave." Silas stared at the paper like it was a gun pressed to his heart. "You made this?" She nodded. "Mama helped us start it before she got sick." "And you want me to do all this? Just for today?" He ran a hand down his face. "This is insane." She folded the paper gently like it was sacred. "You said you'd stay, that's the start." The first thing they did was fix the chapel step. It had been loose for weeks. The freckled one handed him a rusted hammer and 2 bent nails. The younger one held the board steady. Silas worked in silence. The girls watched in silence. When it was done, the younger one whispered, "Mama couldn't fix it. She always said it'd take someone strong." Silas stood back aching and said, "She was probably stronger than me." They walked after that, past the edge of town, up the narrow trail where the trees thinned and the sky opened wide above the valley. The girls pointed out birds, told stories of hiding here during storms, of chasing each other until they couldn't breathe. Silas listened. Every now and then he asked a question. They answered like they'd known him forever. At the top of the hill, they sat beneath a crooked pine. "What now?" he asked. The younger one pulled out a folded scarf and tied it around his wrist. "Mama said fathers wear things we make." He stared at the ragged fabric. It was stitched with uneven thread, a little hard in the corner, his throat clenched. "What's this for?" She just smiled. "For remembering." Back in town, people watched. Whispers followed. Silas Jude, the ghost in boots, walking through Main Street with 2 girls clinging to his arms like he was safety itself. He ignored the stares. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a threat. He felt seen. Later that afternoon, they sat on the chapel steps. The sun dipped low. The wind shifted. "You know this ends tonight," he said quietly. The freckled one didn't look at him. "We know." "And after that?" The younger one curled into her sister. "Then we hope." Silas stared at the horizon. A storm was brewing out there, not in the sky, but somewhere deeper, something he couldn't stop. That evening, as the sun vanished and the girls drifted to sleep on the floor of the chapel, Silas sat outside, the scarf still tied around his wrist. The list lay beside him. He picked it up, scanned it again. One thing remained. "Don't leave." He stared at those words for a long time, long enough for the stars to show. Then someone shouted. "Hoofbeats!" Dust rising fast. A rider, no 2, maybe 3. Silas stood, his eyes narrowing. He recognized the one in front, and every part of him turned to ice. The lead rider reined in hard just beyond the chapel fence, dust curling up like smoke around his horse's legs. Silas didn't move. The scarf was still tied around his wrist, limp against the wind. He let it stay there. A reminder, a warning. The second rider, smaller, younger, held the reins too loose, like he hadn't yet earned the saddle he rode in. The third, behind them both, wore a face so sun-leathered and hollowed with time that he looked half dead already. but it was the first man that mattered. He swung down easy, brushed his coat back and grinned. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "Silas Jude." Silas didn't blink. "Ward." The grin widened. "Didn't think I'd find you this far west. Figured you drunk yourself into a ditch by now, or turned into myth. Didn't think you'd come looking." "Oh, I ain't. Just passing through. But then I heard a ghost was walking around with a couple of kids on his arms, smiling like he forgot what he was. Thought I ought to see it for myself." Silas stepped down from the porch. The ground felt unsteady, like it wasn't sure whether to hold him or let him fall. "You come for something, or you just plan to talk until your teeth rot out?" Ward's smile didn't falter. "I came for what you owe." "I don't owe you." "You do, and you know it." Behind him the chapel door creaked open. A small voice whispered his name. Silas turned just enough to see them, freckled and fierce and tired and watching. He met their eyes, held them, then looked back at Ward. "Not now," he said. "Not here." Ward tilted his head. "Why not?" "Because there are lines I don't cross anymore." Ward chuckled. "You still pretending you've changed?" He spit into the dirt. "You think you can play house with a couple of strays and that washes off what we did?" Silas said nothing. The third rider stepped down, boots crunching like dried bones. "It's not just Ward, Silas. We all got ghosts trailing us, and yours are loud." Silas's hand brushed the revolver at his side. Not drawn, just there, a warning. Ward's grin turned sharp. "You ain't faster than me anymore." "Don't have to be," Silas said quietly. "Just have to be sure." Behind him, the girls had stepped onto the porch. Their silence was the loudest thing in the street. Ward saw them. His grin faltered for the first time. "Is that them?" Silas didn't answer. "I heard rumors. One of 'em looks like her." "Don't," Silas said. Ward blinked. "Hell, Silas, is that why you're playing daddy?" Silas moved faster than thought. He was on Ward in a blink, fist in his collar, shoving him back against the fence post hard enough to rattle teeth. The other riders reached for iron, but Silas didn't draw, just pressed his knuckles into Ward's throat. "You say her name," Silas growled, "and I'll forget every promise I ever made." Ward wheezed, laughing through the pressure. "There he is." Silas let go. Ward staggered, coughing, adjusting his coat. "This ain't over," he rasped. "It is for now." Ward glanced toward the girls one last time, then mounted. "Still bleeding from that same old wound, huh?" Silas didn't respond, just watched as they rode off, kicking up dust and ghosts with them. When they were gone, the street stayed quiet. The girls hadn't moved. Neither had Silas. The scarf on his wrist fluttered slightly in the wind. Finally, the freckled one spoke. "Who was that?" He turned to face them. "Nobody." The younger one stepped forward. "Why were they angry?" Silas crouched to meet her eyes. "Because people like that don't understand how to let go." She looked at his hand, still curled like it had never left Ward's collar. Then she slipped her fingers into his and whispered, "We're not scared." He nodded, but his voice cracked when he replied, "You should be." That night the chapel felt smaller, the air inside heavier. The girls slept, curled like commas in the unfinished sentence of their lives. Silas sat near the door, gun in his lap, the list unfolded beside him. The final line stared up at him like a dare. "Don't leave." He closed his eyes. When he woke it was still dark, but something had changed. A sound, a whisper in the silence. He rose, gun in hand, and stepped outside. A horse stood alone near the fence. No rider. Just a note, pinned to the saddle with a knife. He pulled it free. "They won't stay safe unless you pay what's due." No signature. But none was needed. He burned the note in the chapel stove. In the morning, the girls didn't mention the scorch marks on his fingers. They only asked what came next. So he gave them what he could. They went fishing, using crooked branches and twine, caught nothing, but the laughter was real. They walked to the old cemetery and planted wildflowers where no names remained. They made a pie from canned peaches and stale biscuits. The freckled one called it victory pie. The younger one called it memory pie. Silas just called it dinner. He told a story, not one about guns or ghosts or outlaws, but about a boy who once believed the stars were old friends, and how he used to name each one before sleep took him. "You don't do that anymore?" the younger asked. He shook his head, stopped looking up. "Why?" He didn't answer. They made him a crown of twigs and dry grass, said fathers should wear crowns. He let them place it on his head, didn't even flinch when it scratched. By evening they were quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before goodbye. Silas sat on the porch as the sun bled out behind the hills. The freckled one joined him. "You don't have to stay," she said softly. "We know you're not ours." He stared at the horizon. "You girls don't know what I've done. Don't care. You should." She shrugged. "We asked for a day, you gave it, that's more than most." He turned to her. "That list you made, who was it for before me?" She hesitated. "Mama wrote most of it, said when the right person came we'd know." "And you think that's me?" She didn't answer. Didn't need to. Inside, her sister slept with the list clutched in her hand. Outside, Silas felt something in his chest shift, like an old door creaking open after years of rot. That night he dreamed of thunder. Not the kind that came from clouds, but the kind that rode on horseback. He woke before the sun. No fire yet in the stove, just the pale suggestion of dawn leaking in through the chapel's warped window panes. The girls were still asleep, bundled together on the floor like two halves of the same breath. One stirred, her brow twitching as she dreamed. The other held tight to the hem of Silas's old coat, which he'd laid across them sometime after midnight. He watched them for a while, his breath misting faintly in the cold air, and wondered how long it had been since anyone had slept beside him without fear. Not counting the dead. He stepped outside quietly, boots crunching frost as he moved toward the edge of the trees. His revolver was slung low against his hip, but his hand didn't rest on it, not yet. He didn't need it for what he was doing. He needed silence, distance, a place to think. The woods behind the chapel sloped downward into a narrow glade where wild sage grew in patches, and a dried-up creek cut across the earth like an old scar. It was here that Silas crouched and pulled from his coat pocket the scarf the girl had tied around his wrist. He ran a thumb over the rough stitching, the heart she'd sewn in the corner, crooked and imperfect. Real. He pressed it to his face like a prayer and tried to remember how to cry. But the tears wouldn't come, not yet. He buried it in his coat again and turned at the sound of footsteps behind him. The younger twin stood at the edge of the clearing, arms crossed tight against the cold. "Didn't mean to wake you," Silas said. "You didn't," she replied, then hesitated. "You left the door open." Silas glanced past her toward the chapel. "Still learning how to stay, I guess." She stepped closer. "Why do you look sad when you smile?" He didn't answer. He didn't know how. She nodded like she understood anyway. "We're not staying here," she said suddenly. Silas blinked. "What?" "Me and her, we're not going east, we decided." He sighed. "That's not how the world works, little one." "Why not?" He hesitated. "Because it's full of people like Ward." She looked down at the frozen ground. "Then we'll find people like you instead." He swallowed. "I ain't who you think I am." "Yes, you are," she said, and walked away before he could respond. Later that morning, they made their way into town. Silas didn't like it, but the girls insisted. They wanted ink and paper and some ribbon if the store had any. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask many things anymore. The townsfolk watched as they passed. Whispers trailed them like smoke, ghost stories wearing dresses and braids, flanked by a legend who never was what they'd imagined. The general store was small, its windows fogged and its bell rusted. Inside, the warmth was welcome. The shopkeep, an older man with one good eye and hands like cracked leather, gave Silas a long look before nodding once. Respect or warning, it was hard to say. The girls scoured the shelves. When they returned to the counter, they placed down 3 items: a spool of blue ribbon, a stub of charcoal, and the cheapest folded paper the store had. "That all?" the shopkeep asked. The freckled one nodded. "Yes, sir." He looked at Silas, who reached into his coat and set down a few coins without a word. On the walk back, the younger twin skipped ahead, humming a song with no melody. The older stayed by Silas's side. "You know how to write letters?" she asked. "I used to," he said. "To who?" He didn't answer. She didn't press. That afternoon, while Silas repaired a loose shutter on the chapel window, the girls sat on the floor near the altar, heads bent low over the paper. They spoke in whispers, shielding their work from his eyes. Occasionally one would giggle. It was strange music, lightness where silence had lived for too long. When the shutter was finally secure, Silas climbed down the ladder and leaned in the doorway. "What were you two scheming?" The younger one looked up. "We're writing letters." "To who?" "To everyone." He raised an eyebrow. "Everyone." "Everyone who's ever left us," the freckled one said, her voice steadier, "and everyone who didn't." Silas didn't know what to say. He stepped back outside and let the wind carry whatever answer he didn't have. That night they lit a small fire in a tin bucket behind the chapel. The girls fed their letters to it one by one, whispering the names aloud as the paper curled and turned to ash. Silas sat behind them, a shadow among shadows, hands folded tight. "Mama," the younger girl said, letting her paper go. "Daddy," said the older, and Silas froze. He hadn't asked about their father, hadn't wanted to. They turned then, holding out the last folded page. "This one's yours," the older said. Silas took it, the parchment crackling slightly in his hand. "We don't need you to burn it," she added. "Just read it when you're ready." And they left him alone with it. Inside, the chapel was dark but for the low glow of the stove. Silas unfolded the letter slowly. Their handwriting was jagged, clumsy, but deliberate. "Dear Mr. Silas Jude, we know you're not really our father. We know you've done things you think you can't take back, but we've watched you. We see what you carry. We see what you try to hide. Today you gave us more than anyone ever has. You didn't run, even when you wanted to. You stayed. You laughed. You listened. You fixed something that wasn't broken just because we asked. That's what fathers do. So even if it's just for today, and even if you leave tomorrow, we wanted you to know something. You were enough. Just for today, you were more than enough. Thank you for giving us something to remember. With love, Cora and June." He read it twice, 3 times, then folded it with hands that shook. And finally the tears came. They didn't crash, didn't burn. They just slid down his cheeks slow and steady, like rain carving through stone. He covered his mouth with one hand, hunched over, and let the grief come. Grief for the men he'd killed. Grief for the woman he'd loved and lost to fever and time. Grief for a little boy who had once called him father and hadn't lived long enough to take his first step. Grief for the years he'd buried everything good because the bad had been louder. And somehow grief for 2 girls who weren't his, but felt like his anyway. He cried until he couldn't breathe. Then he folded the letter, tucked it into his coat pocket, and whispered into the firelight, "I won't leave." But outside, under the stars, the storm he'd feared was already on its way. It was just before dawn when Silas woke to the sound of boots outside the chapel. Not one pair. Several. He didn't need to see them to know it was Ward again. The way the wind dropped to a hush, how the birds stopped singing, the way the ground seemed to hold its breath, these were signs men like Silas knew by instinct. He was on his feet in seconds, revolver drawn, coat shrugged on, and hat pressed low over his eyes. The girls were still asleep, curled together like they'd been carved from one soul instead of two. He didn't wake them yet. He just watched them, let the silence wrap around him, and gave himself 5 more heartbeats to pretend everything might be okay. Then he crossed to the door and cracked it open. 4 riders, same 3 from before Ward, the wiry kid with the loose reins and the hollow-eyed elder, but a 4th had joined them, taller, stockier, dressed in a duster that hadn't seen dust in years. His hat was wide-brimmed, clean, the kind of man who used polish to hide the rot beneath. He wasn't smiling. Ward tipped his chin. "Morning, Silas." Silas stepped out slowly. The cold bit into his bones, but he didn't show it. "What's your game?" he asked flatly. "No game," Ward said. "Just come to settle up. Brought the boss with me this time." The man in the clean coat dismounted with precision, like even his weight refused to touch the earth more than necessary. His eyes, sharp and narrow, landed on Silas like he was something to be measured and priced. "You're Silas Jude." Silas didn't answer. "I've heard about you. Used to ride with men who didn't leave names behind. Used to leave towns burning." "That was a long time ago." "Not long enough," the man replied. "Ward here tells me you found something new, something worth protecting." Silas's shoulders squared. "Whatever you think I've got, you're wrong." "I'm never wrong," the man said, stepping closer, "and I don't make offers twice." Silas glanced toward the chapel door, just a flicker, but the man caught it. "Children," he said softly, "that's a dangerous investment for a man like you. You come here to threaten kids." "I came here to collect," the man said, voice sharpening. "Ward says you left something unfinished, that you cost me men and coin when you walked away from the Hollow Six, that you knew too much and carried it too far. I let it slide back then. Figured you'd de-drink yourself into a coffin, but now you're planting roots." Silas took a step forward, slow and certain. "You lay a hand on them, and I'll bury you with your own tongue." The man didn't flinch. "I'm not here to kill you, Silas. I'm here to give you a choice, one I don't usually give." Silas raised an eyebrow. "You come with us, finish what you left undone. Ride one more time, just enough to settle the debt. Then you vanish, walk away clean, leave the kids, leave the town, no blood." "And if I do?" The man smiled faintly. "Then the blood won't be yours." Something inside Silas snapped, but he didn't move. He kept his voice low, steady. "You've got till sundown to get out of my sight." Ward looked like he wanted to laugh, but the man turned without a word, mounted his horse, and rode off. The others followed. Silas waited until the dust settled, then exhaled through his teeth. Behind him, the chapel door creaked. The girls stood in the doorway, barefoot and pale, their eyes wide with the weight of something they didn't yet understand, but knew was heavy. "Who was that?" Cora asked. Silas didn't lie. "Trouble." June took a step toward him. "Are we in danger?" He hesitated, then nodded. And something in their faces changed. Not fear, not quite. It was quieter than that, a slow understanding, like they'd lived enough to know that safety was always temporary. "I'm not leaving you," Silas said, voice rough. They didn't ask him to promise. They just walked to him, one on either side, and each took a hand. That afternoon, the town knew something was wrong. Silas moved through the streets like a man caught between storms, his presence heavier than usual, his eyes distant. He stopped at the general store, the feed house, the old stable behind the inn, spoke in low tones to the men who would still speak to him. He wasn't asking for help. He was saying goodbye. That evening, he taught the girls how to shoot. Not with bullets, just rocks and bottles and lines drawn in the dirt. Cora steadied her aim like she was born with iron in her spine. June laughed every time she missed, then tried again without complaint. "Are we gonna have to run?" June asked after a while. "Maybe," Silas said, "but I hope not. And if we do, then you don't stop until your lungs give out and your legs turn to water. You hear me?" They nodded. "And if I'm not behind you?" "You keep running," Cora said. Silas looked at her, and for the first time in years he felt proud, terrified but proud. That night they didn't sleep. They lay awake in the chapel, all three of them, staring at the ceiling while the wind pressed against the windows. "Tell us something true," June whispered. Silas turned his head. "What kind of truth?" "Something from before," Cora said, "before you met us." He hesitated, then said, "I had a son once." The silence sharpened. "What was his name?" June asked. "Eli." "Where is he now?" "Buried under cottonwood trees outside Jericho Ridge." "What happened?" Silas stared at the dark above them. "I left for a job, said I'd be back in 3 days, came back in 5. By then the fever had taken him, and her." He didn't say her name. Didn't have to. The girls were quiet. Then Cora shifted closer, her hand finding his. "You came back late," she said, "but you came back." He didn't speak, couldn't. Sometime before dawn, he dozed. And sometime after that, the fire burned low. And sometime after that, gunfire. One shot. Close. Then a second. Closer. Silas was on his feet before he was awake. He shoved the girls behind the pew and pulled his revolver. Outside, the air was thick with smoke. Something was burning. He cracked the door open and saw the stable engulfed in flames. The horses, every one of them, trapped inside screaming. He didn't have to wonder who did it. Ward was standing just beyond the firelight, grinning. No words, no warnings. Just smoke and ash and vengeance. Silas stepped outside. Behind him, the girls shouted for him to wait. But he didn't stop. Not this time. The heat from the burning stable slammed into him the moment Silas stepped into the yard. Sparks leapt skyward like fireworks turned bitter, ash falling soft as snow. The horses screamed louder now, a sound that didn't sound like animals anymore. It sounded human, helpless, afraid. The whole damn world reeked of smoke and cruelty. Ward stood just beyond the reach of the fire, his silhouette flickering like a shadow trying to escape its host. He wasn't grinning anymore. He was watching. Watching Silas. Waiting to see what he'd do. Silas didn't give him the satisfaction of asking why. He already knew. Ward was peeling the edges of his soul back, trying to get him to slip, to fall back into who he used to be. Blood for blood, eye for eye, burn it all to the ground. But Silas wasn't that man anymore. He still stepped toward him. "Ward didn't move. Told you I'd come collecting." "You burned innocent animals for a debt that ain't yours," Silas said, his voice low and steady. "What's next? You gonna shoot a kid?" Ward shrugged. "Only if you make me." Silas took another step. "You've always been a coward." Ward's jaw clenched, but he smiled. "I've just always known how to win." Behind Silas, he heard the chapel door open. The girls' voices shouting his name, begging him not to go further. One of them sobbed. June, probably. She cried quieter than her sister, but the pain ran deeper. He didn't look back, couldn't. "You ain't gonna win this one," Silas said. "Oh, I already have," Ward said, and nodded toward the fire. The flames surged. Part of the stable collapsed with a roar. Horses shrieked one last time and then went silent. And just like that, another piece of the world Silas was building, with those girls turned to smoke. Ward mounted his horse. "You've got till sunrise," he called, his voice thin over the roar of the fire. "After that the boss comes, and he don't give no second chances." Then he rode off. Silas stood there until the flames died back enough for the smoke to sting. He stayed long after the horses were dead, and the wood had crumbled into glowing coals. Only then did he turn back toward the chapel. The girls were waiting for him on the porch. Cora had her fists clenched, jaw tight, a storm trapped in a 10-year-old's chest. June was holding the scarf she'd made him, the one with the crooked heart. Her fingers twisted it without realizing. "Why didn't you stop them?" Cora asked, her voice almost shaking. Silas didn't answer. "You let them burn the horses." "I tried," he said, but the words felt thin, weak. Cora's eyes filled. "You said we were safe." "I thought we were." "You were wrong." And she turned and walked inside. June stayed. She didn't speak, just reached up and pressed the scarf into his hand, then followed her sister. Silas stood alone in the yard, smoke curling around his boots, the scarf warm from her grip. He didn't go inside right away. Instead he walked, past the edge of town, down to the stream, then further through the low hills where the cottonwoods grew. He needed space, air, something bigger than pain. The moon followed him like it was worried. When he stopped, he dropped to his knees and dug his fingers into the cold earth. He prayed. Not to God. To Eli. To the boy who never got to swing a lasso or feel the sun on his back. To the woman he left behind on a Tuesday morning, promising he'd only be gone 3 days. To anyone who might listen. "Tell me what to do," he whispered, "because I'm lost and I can't lose them too." The wind didn't answer. But the world felt quieter somehow. When he returned, the chapel was dark. No light, no laughter, just silence. He found them curled on the floor again, but this time they hadn't fallen asleep naturally. They decried themselves into it, faces puffy, hands clutching each other like lifelines. He sat beside them and didn't sleep. Just watched the door and waited. Dawn broke like a knife, slicing the horizon open. Red lights spilled across the town, and with it came riders. Not just Ward this time. The boss had come. Silas counted 8 men total. 4 rode in front, 4 behind. They didn't charge, didn't gallop. They moved slow, like death on a casual stroll. Ward rode beside the boss now, back to grinning, as if everything was a joke only he understood. Silas stood in front of the chapel, not inside, not hiding. He wanted them to see him. The boss dismounted and walked forward alone. He didn't speak for a long time, just looked Silas up and down. "I've heard stories," the man finally said. "Thought you'd be taller." Silas didn't reply. "You made a mistake walking away," the boss said. "You made a worse one staying. Roots make you slow, sentimental, weak." Silas tilted his head. "And what do you call men who burn stables and threaten children?" The boss shrugged. "Efficient." "You gonna kill me?" "Not if you come with us." "I'm not going anywhere." The man sighed. "Then I'll take them." The chapel door creaked. Cora stepped out, June behind her. Neither looked afraid, just angry, determined, the way only children who have seen too much can be. "You won't touch them," Silas said. The boss looked at the girls, then back at Silas. "Then you know what this is." "I do." And Silas drew. He didn't aim for the boss. Not yet. He shot the ground in front of Ward's horse, spooking it. The animal reared and kicked. Ward fell hard, shouting, scrambling in the dust. Then chaos. Gunfire erupted quick, sharp. Silas ducked behind a post and returned fire. Not aiming to kill. Just to scatter. And it worked. 2 of the men dropped. One with a bullet to the leg, another screaming from a shoulder wound. The rest hesitated. They hadn't expected resistance. Silas shouted over the gunfire, "Go, run." But the girls didn't run. They threw rocks. Big ones. At the men. At their horses. At everything. Silas fired again, hit one man's hand, sent his gun flying. Cora hit another in the side with a jagged stone. He cried out and fell. June picked up a piece of broken glass and brandished it like a knife, her small hands shaking but steady. The boss raised his gun. Silas turned and shot it from his hand. The man screamed, dropped to his knees. Silas was on him in 2 strides. Punched him once, twice, then stood over him. "Don't come back." The man spat blood. "You're gonna regret this." "No," Silas said, "you are." By the time it was done, the yard was covered in broken guns and broken men. Ward crawled away, clutching his ribs, and vanished into the trees. The others followed, what was left of them. The boss stumbled to his horse, one hand bleeding, the other shaking. He looked back once, and then he was gone. Silas stood in the yard, breath ragged, gun low. Behind him, the girls were silent. Then June said, "You didn't kill them." "No," Silas said. "You could have." "I know." Cora stepped beside him. "Why didn't you?" He looked at them both. "Because I'm not him anymore." The girls nodded. And finally, Cora reached for his hand. He took it. Then June did too. And the 3 of them stood there in the dirt, broken and burning and still standing. Together. By midday, the town was still. The smoke had cleared, the echoes of gunfire drifted into memory, and the air held that uncertain hush of a place waiting to decide what it had become. No one came to help. No one came to ask questions. People had seen enough from their windows and behind drawn curtains. A few would whisper that Silas Jude had turned the chapel into a battleground, but others would say he'd stood between 2 children and the hell that came for them, and that wasn't something this town had seen in a long time. Inside the chapel, Silas cleaned his gun. He sat at the altar like a man at confession, oiling the cylinder and checking the barrel, moving with the same quiet care as someone sharpening a blade beside their own throat. The girls sat across from him, Cora braiding June's hair without speaking. There was no laughter now, but there wasn't fear either. They looked at him with something closer to awe, distant and quiet. It unsettled him more than he expected. He finished reassembling the gun and set it aside. Then he looked at the scarf again, still folded in his pocket. The crooked heart was beginning to fray at the edges. "I'm sorry," he said finally. Cora didn't stop braiding. "For what?" "For bringing that on you." "You didn't bring it," she said, still focused on June's braid. "They did." June looked over. "Are they gone for good?" Silas stared at the floor. "Men like that don't leave scars unless they mean to come back." "So they'll come back?" she asked softly. Silas didn't answer. Because he didn't know. Later he walked the edge of the town, not patrolling, just thinking. The sun was high and too bright, as if the world didn't realize it had nearly lost itself a few hours earlier. He passed burned-out beams and the blackened remains of the stable. The bodies had already been taken by someone, dragged out under the cover of silence. No graves, no questions, just absence. The sheriff never showed. No badge in sight, just the echo of gunshots still hiding in the wind. Back inside the chapel, the girls had begun packing. Cora wrapped the last of their ribbon around the small wooden box Silas had whittled the day before. June folded their blanket with the kind of care that made Silas feel like something was ending. "What are you doing?" he asked. Cora looked up, getting ready. "For what?" She didn't answer. He walked over, crouched down beside them. "I told you I'm not leaving." June's lip trembled. "But what if we are?" Silas frowned. "Where would you go?" Cora hesitated, then pulled a small, folded map from her skirt pocket. "We found this in the store. It shows the old railroad trail. There's a house here." She pointed to a spot near the ridge. "A woman used to live there, took in orphans. We heard two ladies in town talking about it." "Her name was Me Calder," June said. "They said she had a big white dog and kept cookies in a jar with a painted bird on it." "She died," Silas said, "3 winters ago." The girls' faces fell. "But the house might still be there," he added, "and someone else could have taken it over." Cora stared down at the map. "It's not far." "Far enough," Silas said, "and too open." "You think it's a trap?" "I think anywhere you walk alone is a kind of trap." June looked at him. "We wouldn't be alone." He stared at them, at their small hands, their wide, worn eyes, their knuckles still bruised from throwing rocks at grown men. They were girls, but only in size. Life had carved woman into them early. "You really want to go?" he asked quietly. "No," Cora said. "But we might need to," June added. That night Silas stayed outside. The stars were out, sharp and cold, and the chapel loomed behind him like a question that didn't have an answer anymore. He lit a match and held it over the corner of the map. He didn't burn it. Just watched the flame lick at the edge and then blew it out. When he walked back inside, the girls were asleep again, wrapped in one quilt this time, side by side like nothing in the world could split them apart. He watched them for a long time, then turned and lay down by the door, hand resting near his revolver, not because he thought someone was coming, but because he couldn't shake the habit. In the morning, there were birds again. Real ones, not the kind born of memory or guilt. They chirped near the window, scratching the silence with something almost hopeful. June stirred first, then Cora. Neither spoke. They just blinked into the light and stretched their limbs slowly, like cats testing the world again. "Are we going today?" June asked. Silas didn't answer right away. "I don't know." Cora sat up. "We're tired of running." "I know," Silas said. "Me too." He turned and opened the chapel door. There was a letter nailed to it. He pulled it free slowly, heart thudding. It was sealed with wax. The color was dark red, not blood, not quite, and the wax bore the shape of a vulture with wings spread. Silas didn't need to read the letter to know what it meant. But he read it anyway. "Silas Jude, you embarrassed us. That's harder to forgive than blood. You turned men into stories and made ghosts of our name. You think this is about the girls. It's not. It's about what you left us with when you walked away. We'll take everything from you. Then we'll start on them. You've got 3 days. Then no one gets mercy." He folded the letter, set it on the floor, and didn't say a word. June watched him from the edge of the pew. "Who's it from?" Silas rubbed his hands over his face. "Ghosts." "Are they coming?" "Yes." Cora stood slowly. "So we run." "No," Silas said. "We prepare." The rest of the day was a blur of motion. He boarded the chapel windows, set traps near the back door, pulled nails from the pews and turned them into caltrops. The girls helped, dragging furniture, boiling water, drawing lines in the dirt where the traps were buried. He taught them how to listen for footsteps, how to tell the difference between a horse and a mule by sound alone, how to reload. They practiced words they'd need if they got split up, names of places they'd meet, knocks they'd use on doors, stories they'd tell if caught. By sunset, the chapel wasn't a place of worship anymore. It was a fortress. That night Silas cooked them rabbit stew over the stove. It wasn't much, but they ate in silence, chewing slowly, as if they knew they needed strength more than taste. After, Cora reached into her pack and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. "We made something," she said, "before the men came." Silas watched her unwrap it. A wooden horse, crudely carved, its legs uneven, but the eyes were careful, gentle, the same way he'd carved the bird days earlier. We want you to keep it, June said. Silas's hands trembled as he took it. I ain't good at keeping things, he said. Then maybe this time try. He nodded, said nothing. That night he didn't sleep at the door. He sat by the window, horse in one hand, revolver in the other, and waited for the sun. The sun didn't rise so much as it bled into the sky, a slow red wound tearing across the horizon. Silas sat still by the window as the first light scraped against the chapel walls, his eyes raw from a night without sleep. He hadn't moved in hours. The girls lay curled under the pews behind him, exhausted from everything a child should never have to do, setting traps, stacking furniture, memorizing escape paths. They'd fallen asleep whispering to each other, faces close, hands still joined even in sleep. The wooden horse sat on the windowsill beside him. He hadn't let it go all night. Outside the road was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that came before a scream. No wind, no birds, no movement, just the hush of a world bracing for impact. Silas exhaled slowly. 3 days. That was the promise. Today was the third. He stood and stretched, joints cracking like gunfire in the silence. He crossed the room and knelt beside the girls, gently brushing the hair back from June's forehead. Time to wake up, he whispered. She blinked once, then twice. Her breath caught in her throat like a sob she didn't want to release. Cora stirred next. She sat up fast, scanning the room for danger. She was already different, sharper, more alert, like the tension had become her spine. They dressed quickly in silence, no words needed. The chapel had become their skin. Silas handed them each a slingshot, small, worn, reliable. You remember where to run. Cora nodded. If the front breaks, we go out the cellar hatch. If the back goes, we head through the kitchen and out the fence line, June added. If you get separated. We don't, Cora said, not ever. Silas gave a soft nod. Good. They moved like a unit now, girls and Gunslinger, defenders of a broken church with nothing but wooden boards and borrowed courage between them and whatever was coming. He watched them take their positions. June tucked herself beneath the altar, the knife hidden in her boot now gripped tight. Cora crouched near the side door, one eye on the back window. He stood by the main door, revolver heavy in his grip. Then they waited. And waited. And waited. Until the silence began to ache. Then finally hooves. A slow rhythm, measured, certain. Not like Ward's men before. Not loud, not rushed. This was slower, hungrier. Silas stepped forward and opened the door just a crack. 5 riders. Not 8, not 10, just 5. That's all it took when they were the right 5. He knew them all. Larkin, the one-eyed man who used to sleep with dynamite under his cot, just in case. Mills, the preacher's son who turned killer after someone burned his family alive. Roscoe, who never said more than 2 words, but was the fastest draw Silas had ever seen. Cass, long braid, longer rifle, a shot so true she could clip a crow's wing from 100 paces. And then him. The boss. Not the one from before, the one with the polished boots and the vulture seal. The boss. Rhett Cale. Silas hadn't seen him in 9 years, 2 months and 3 days. But he'd never forgotten the shape of that man's shadow. Rhett dismounted like gravity was his servant. He walked forward without a word, the others hanging back like wolves that had already eaten. His coat flapped softly behind him, dust clinging to the hem. Silas stepped outside. They stood there in the morning light, 2 men built from the same ruin, staring across the years like a wound reopened. Thought you died, Rhett said finally. Almost did. Should have. Maybe, Silas replied, but I didn't. Rhett's eyes drifted to the chapel behind him. You hiding something in there. Not hiding, protecting. Same thing. No, Silas said, it ain't. Rhett shifted his weight. I gave you your chance, Jude. I didn't take it. Then I'll take what's mine. You'll try. Silence. Rhett looked over his shoulder at his riders. He's alone. You sure? Cass asked, her voice like flint striking steel. Yeah, Rhett said. He's always been alone. That was the mistake. Because Silas wasn't alone anymore. Not now. A sharp whistle cut through the air. Roscoe's horse bucked. Something exploded behind the fence line. A trap, rigged with an old powder horn and nails. Larkin cursed and reached for his rifle. And Cora popped up from the side window and flung a rock dead center at his forehead. He staggered back with a cry, blood streaming down his temple. June burst from the altar, sprinted to Silas's side, and slid him the second revolver. He caught it mid-stride and dropped to a knee, firing twice. Roscoe's gun flew from his hand. Cass ducked just in time. Mills shouted something, Silas didn't hear what. The yard turned to chaos. Gunsmoke choked the air, horses reared, a window shattered. Cora disappeared into the smoke, then reappeared behind the fence, dragging June with her. Silas moved like a ghost. He shot to wound. Never to kill. He wasn't that man anymore. But Rhett didn't have the same reservations. He drew and fired once, grazing Silas's shoulder. Silas grunted, dropped to the dirt, rolled, came up firing. Rhett staggered back, bullet in his leg. Cass took the shot then, fast and clean. It would have hit Silas in the throat. But June screamed. And Silas turned. The bullet caught him in the ribs instead. He dropped. The girls shrieked. Cora ran to him, June at her heels. But Rhett wasn't done. He staggered forward, gun raised, blood pouring from his thigh. This ends now, he hissed. No, Silas coughed, it doesn't. Cora picked up the fallen revolver. She aimed it with both hands, arms shaking. I'll do it, she said. Rhett laughed, you're a child. I'm his child. And she fired. The bullet caught Rhett in the shoulder, spinning him backward. He fell hard. Didn't move. Cass screamed. Mills grabbed her arm. Enough. Roscoe just stood there, bleeding and watching. Silas coughed again. Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth. But he smiled. Because the girls were still standing. And he was still breathing. For now. They pressed against him, tiny hands clutching at his coat. I'm okay, he rasped. You're not, June said, tears streaking her face. Doesn't matter, Silas said, you are. Behind them, Cass helped Rhett to his feet. They didn't fight anymore. They just retreated, broken, bitter, and bleeding. No words, no threats, just silence. Silas slumped against the chapel steps. Cora sat beside him. You shouldn't have come outside. He laughed, then winced. I never was good at staying put. June laid her head against his arm. You stayed for us. Still am, he whispered. They sat like that until the sky turned orange, and the air smelled like blood and firewood. Night crept in. But this time, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like something else. They laid Silas on the pew while the chapel held its breath. The bullet had gone through clean, but he'd lost blood. June pressed a cloth to the wound while Cora boiled water and tore strips from an old curtain. They worked like they'd done it before, though they hadn't. No child should have to. Silas didn't make a sound. He just watched them, tears burning his throat, refusing to fall. You're not allowed to die, June whispered. I ain't, he rasped. I'm too damn stubborn. He winced as they tied the last bandage. Cora wiped sweat from his brow and said nothing, her eyes fixed on the door. June curled beside his boots and fell asleep there. The wooden horse sat between them, silent witness to a fight they'd somehow won. By morning, the world was still. Cora found the letter nailed to the fence. Black wax, no signature. "We're done, you won," she made her point. "Don't expect us to come back, but don't expect peace to last either." Silas read it once, then tossed it into the fire. He stood by noon, slow but standing. The girls cheered like it was a miracle. In a way, it was. They ate soup, laughed a little, fixed a broken shelf. June painted a crooked sun above the altar. Cora cleaned the yard. Then on the porch, June asked softly, "Can we stay?" Silas looked at her, then at Cora, watching from the doorway. "You want that?" "We do," Cora said, "if you do." He looked down at his hand, at the scar, the bandage, the little wooden horse. Then nodded once, "Then we stay." They repaired the chapel with love and bent nails. Silas limped, but he worked. The girls planted flowers near the step. The town kept its distance but slowly began to return. No one asked what happened, but everyone noticed the names carved above the chapel door. Cora June Jud. One morning, June sat beside him on the porch. "You ever gonna cry?" He said nothing, just looked out at the dirt path where his past used to chase him. The little horse sat on the rail, its carved legs rough and uneven. He reached out, touched it. And the tears came. Slow, quiet. June didn't speak. She just held his hand. They stayed. And for the first time in a long time, Silas Jude didn't wake each morning waiting for the past to catch him. He woke to laughter, to breakfast, to a family, even if just for a day that never quite ended.